After more than 30 years on the country's highest court, Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy says he is retiring. The 81-year-old was nominated to the court in 1987 by President Reagan. He was a swing vote in many high-profile cases, including ones addressing abortion, gay rights, guns, campaign finance, and voter rights. Kennedy's retirement creates an opportunity for President Trump to shake up the balance of the court. He's now faced with naming the second Supreme Court nominee of his presidency. Mr. Trump said Justice Kennedy's successor will come from a list of 25 candidates he considered last year. For more on this, I want to bring in Niall Stanage in Washington. He's a White House columnist for The Hill. Niall, what more do we know about this list of 25 names, and what specifically is the president looking for in his next nominee?
The president's clearly going to be looking for a reliably conservative judge, Tanya. This list was originally drawn up or derived from a list that gave rise to his first nominee, Neil Gorsuch. It is a list that is drawn up in conjunction with conservative think tanks. And the bigger picture here is that this is really a once-in-a-generation chance to shape the court and to shift the court. Once-in-a-generation opportunity, President Trump would think, a once-in-a-generation threat, liberals would say.
Absolutely. So how significant is a second Supreme Court nomination for President Trump, or for any president, really?
The reason that this is particularly significant, Tanya, is because you're replacing a swing vote, a relatively centrist figure in Justice Kennedy, with what we assume to be a conservative figure. That would leave John Roberts, the current Chief Justice, as the closest thing to a swing vote. But Roberts is to the right of where Kennedy is. Therefore, that could have all sorts of repercussions, particularly on social issues, things like abortion and affirmative action. That's where Justice Kennedy tended to side with the court's liberal wing, and where others would not.
Right. And Niall, how will Democrats challenge President Trump's nominee? I mean, they're expected to challenge the timing of this, first of all, right? They want to do this after November.
They do, and they're seizing in that effort on Mitch McConnell's actions in the closing year of President Obama's term, when McConnell refused to bring up Obama's then nominee for a vote. The problem for Democrats is that they don't have control of the Senate, as Mitch McConnell did back then, and the numbers have literally been changed, so you only need a simple majority now. That complicates the calculus for Democrats a lot. What they'll be looking to is seeing if they can pressure moderate Republican senators to vote with them against a Republican president. And that is always a difficult ask, even when the president is so polarizing as President Trump.
So in what ways do you expect to see Republicans attempt to capitalize on this opening ahead of the midterms? I mean, how quickly do you think we're going to see a candidate?
Well, President Trump today was saying that he will move immediately. Now, Justice Kennedy's retirement doesn't officially take effect until the end of July, but I would imagine that the president and his party colleagues in the Senate will want to get this moving as fast as possible. There is a kind of more convoluted argument that you could postpone it and use it to try to animate or to energize the Republican base for the midterm elections, but that's not the signals we're receiving at this point.
Let me ask you something about the timing of his retirement. Are justices just immune to the schedule? You know, the midterm elections happening in November, his retirement happening July 31st. How much do you think that factors into the arbitrary date a justice chooses to retire?
I'm sure if you asked any justice that, they would say they're immune from political calculation. But in the real world, I mean, these are clearly people who are immensely engaged with the public life of the nation. They know what's at stake here. There are certain justices that have clearly, for example, stayed on past ages that they might consider retiring because they would have feared that they would be replaced by someone who they didn't like ideologically. So these factors do play some part, whatever people might say publicly.
All right, so switching topics, Niall. The House failed to pass a compromise immigration bill Wednesday. President Trump had encouraged House Republicans to pass it sort of at the 11th hour. Will we see a shift in the president's agenda and rhetoric now that the bill has failed?
The president's rhetoric, obviously on immigration broadly, has been pretty hard line. On the specifics of the bill, he flip-flopped, frankly, to the discomfort of many members of his own party. At some times he'd seem to be encouraging the bill, at other times saying it was a waste of time. This idea of even a somewhat broad bill to protect people, the so-called Dreamers, people protected under President Obama's DACA program, in all likelihood that effort is dead. We're now moving toward looking at legislation that will give force to President Trump's desire now not to separate families under the so-called zero-tolerance policy.
So does all of this take some pressure off of Republicans heading toward November, or is that immigration pressure still there?
Really depends which Republicans you're talking about. The moderate or more centrist Republicans had actually pushed for this legislation to be considered because they want to go back to their districts and say they made at least an effort to protect the Dreamers. But now that this effort has essentially collapsed, I don't think there's any real overall pressure to pick up an issue like this again anytime before November.
Yes. All right. So lastly, Niall, the White House says there will be a summit between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. What is President Trump hoping to accomplish with this meeting?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure we've got a totally clear answer to it yet. He has for a long time argued that the United States and the world would benefit from a more civil or friendly relationship with Russia. That's how he framed it again in brief comments today. But in terms of concrete or tangible goals, that's a lot less clear. He seems to believe that it would improve the atmosphere between the two nations and that it's worth doing for that reason alone.
All right. Well, we will see what comes out of this summit. Niall Stanage, thank you.
Thanks, Tanya.